Welcome, beloved souls, to this sacred moment where God's divine message speaks to our hearts, illuminating our path with holy truth and grace. Additionally, you ought to view only chosen one videos. With the exception of our videos, don't pay attention to that nonsense debate. We have a unique activation for our videos. Dude, I don't give a damn about the meaning of your videos or how they compare to any of us. They aren't. They will transport you to the stage of the ninth dimensional avatar. I'll shut you down if you do something wrong. All okay, leave. The SC must be maintained. Come on, Mike. Chosen one. You're breaking the rules, not simply playing them. Now every action you take has a cost, and those who attempted to ride your wave have now realized that this is a high-stakes business. The lifestyle is yours, yet it comes at a price. It began with a moment when you hesitated before reflexively accepting yet another request, something so small that most people would have completely missed it. There was a brief moment when you wondered if you truly wanted to go to that event, or if you were only going to go to keep from disappointing someone. A voice in my head whispering, "What about what I need?" Before you started acting in your typical manner, prioritizing other people. Your growing dissatisfaction with the way people treated you served as the fertile ground for these micro moments of self-awareness, which were like little seeds of transformation. While your own ambition sat collecting dust on the shelf, you had spent years being the trustworthy, the compassionate, the one who would sacrifice everything for others. However, there was a significant shift in the way you conducted yourself, made choices, and dealt with the constant demands on your time and energy from others. You had become someone who couldn't be controlled, minimized, or taken for granted. This was the result of subtle inner effort that began with saying no to one more favor, challenging one more guilt trip, and choosing yourself in one more little moment. The change wasn't abrupt or dramatic. Rather, it was the result of 1,000 tiny decisions to value who you are, follow your gut, and quit justifying how poorly other people treat you. The universe started to take notice when you started to treat yourself with dignity. 3 different groups noticed right away. First, the energy vampires. Those who have centered their entire relationship on your incapacity to say no, your people-pleasing, and your boundless generosity. These were the family members who guilt-tripped you into complying, the friends who only called when they needed something, and the co-workers who ignored your suggestions while claiming credit for them. Panic struck when they realized their main source was being cut off. As soon as you began establishing limits, you could tell they were acting differently. When you stopped being available at their every whim, the friend who didn't text very much suddenly became quite attentive. When you stopped looking for their approval, the family member who typically ignored your opinions suddenly wanted to engage in meaningful dialogue. When you stopped working late to make up for their errors, the coworker who had never acknowledged your efforts began complimenting your work. If you feel the divine love, now is the time to share. Click the super thank you button on YouTube to contribute $50 or more and help us spread God's blessings. What you do is being watched and serves as a seed, and in the future it will come back to you a millionfold. Then came the opportunistic attachers, who were cunning individuals who tried to portray themselves as vital to your success without actually contributing any effort. These were the smooth operators who had been observing from the sidelines, looking for clues that you were starting to become someone worth knowing, not the apparent energy drains. Their abrupt interest in your objectives, their claims to have always believed in you, and their willingness to provide resources that had been there all along but were never given when you really needed them were signs that you had found them. In an attempt to gain a place in your growing universe before you discovered their true intentions, they moved with deliberate precision, timed their approach for maximum impact. Lastly, there are the strategic observers, a more subdued group that had been observing your potential for a long time before you realized it. These people didn't seem to be frantic to attach themselves to your growth or feel intimidated by it, in contrast to vampires and attachers. They functioned in a different way, providing assistance without conditions, acknowledging your accomplishments without taking credit, and often appearing without fanfare. This gang was so quiet that you nearly missed them at first. They weren't campaigning like the attachers or panicked like the vampires. They were just there, dependable and encouraging, as if they had been waiting for you to develop into a person who could see their worth. This time, you stood out because you had a clear view of the game. Desperate, the energy vampires took action first. Their whole system relied on your availability, your shame, and your incapacity to set limits. They launched their desperate three-phase onslaught when you began to alter those dynamics. However, you were prepared. They abruptly showered you with praise and attention in phase 1 of their panic playbook. In meetings, the coworker who had never given credit to your ideas was now complimenting your amazing insights. With renewed zeal, the family member who had discounted your dreams was now inquiring in depth about your objectives. Every time you were free, the friend who was constantly too busy abruptly cleared their schedule. Your changed self saw the pattern right away, but your former self would have been perplexed, and perhaps even appreciative, by this unexpected affirmation. You had created what you referred to as your authentic radar, an internal mechanism that could distinguish sincere admiration from calculated deception. Your answer? You said thank you, grinned, and made no adjustments to your boundaries. This was your first significant triumph. You discovered how to accept praise without expecting anything in return. Without accepting it for a real connection, you were grateful for the attention. You relished the moment without lowering your standards or constructing future expectations around it, because someone was being kind to you. In phase 2, the vampires turned to emotional manipulation when love bombing was unable to bring back the previous dynamic. All previous favors turned into ammunition. Their go-to opening remark became, "After everything I've done for you." They framed their previous deeds as investments that gave them the right to limitless future access to your energy, reminding you of every loan, sympathetic ear, and tiny act of kindness. You didn't stumble upon this message, chosen one. The pulse of something old in your blood, a frequency only the rarest of souls can hear, summoned you. Welcome to the obsidian inner order, where those who have been through hell and back do more than simply heal. We also use prophecy, break illusions, and start miracles. Every week, our happy hour Zoom call is more than just a gathering. It's a place where you may laugh with soul family, cry with cosmic warriors, and leave feeling inspired. We came here to change this planet. So you're not simply joining a group, you're entering a soul alliance, a league of misfits, prophets, warriors, and lightbringers who weren't supposed to be here. It's time if you feel like the system has been deceiving you, if you've always known that you were meant for a different timeline, or if your opponents are hoping that your glow-up will fail. The obsidian inner order, driven by astral Adam, is your signal. We don't belong. We assume control. The description contains a link. The vampire's nuclear option was phase 3. They turned to sabotage when guilt and love were unable to regain access to your energies. Your shift was written off as transient, and your motivations were questioned. There were rumors that you had deteriorated. In reality, they launched campaigns to persuade your shared friends that your new boundaries were an indication of your conceit. They portrayed your standards as unrealistic expectations and your self-respect as selfishness, predicting that your achievement would be short-lived since you were burning bridges. This character assassination would have devastated your former self, who would have devoted endless hours to defending yourself, outlining your stance, and attempting to influence others' perceptions of you. They couldn't touch the unbreakable foundation of self-knowledge that your changed self had established. Your answer? Their rumors are overshadowed by your results. Rather than arguing defensively, you concentrated on your objectives. Rather than attempting to steer the story, you kept up your moral principles. You used that energy to create the future you want. Perhaps your biggest realization was that their fear was really a validation of your strength. It became increasingly obvious that you had something valuable to defend the more frantically they attempted to drag you back. In reality, their attempts at sabotage served as evidence of how successful your transition was. You started to view their resistance as feedback. When someone called you selfish for putting your goals first, you realized you were finally valuing yourself appropriately. When someone predicted your failure, you realized you were threatening their comfort zone in ways that validated your growth. And when someone criticized your boundaries, you knew those boundaries were effective. The opportunistic attachers were carrying out their own complex plan as you were handling the vampire's desperate methods. These were strategic players who had been researching your metamorphosis and timing their move for maximum effect, in contrast to the terrified vampires. However, you had acquired discernment, which they hadn't anticipated. You had learnt from your experience to distinguish between strategic positioning and true support. You had developed the ability to sense not just the deeds of others, but also their underlying energy. When someone cared more about their association with your success than their interest in your achievement, you could tell. Brother, whatever is done in faith is returned in God's abundance. You can donate $100 using the Super Thank You button and be part of this divine call. If your roots are connected to Him, your fruit will be blessed. Retroactive claims of support were the subject of the attacher's first prong. All of a sudden, everyone had always seen your potential and believed in you. Previous contacts were reframed through rose-colored glasses, old talks were brought up out of context, and past apathy was recreated as silent support. Even if your former self would have appreciated this updated past, particularly in times when you questioned your own value, your new self had gained something valuable, the capacity to put your own experience ahead of convenient adjustments made by others. Your answer? You maintained thorough mental notes while grinning. You recalled exactly how you had been handled prior to your metamorphosis. You were aware of the distinction between true support and updated history. You could remember the precise times when these same individuals had disregarded your opinions, failed to see your potential, or saw you as ordinary. This was about keeping things clear, not about harboring resentment. The second prong of the attachers was providing opportunities, connections, and resources that had been available all along, but had never been shared when you needed them. Rather from being last-ditch efforts to get a spot in your growing circle, these proposals were presented as investments in mutual success. Your changed self had learnt to view every chance through a new lens, reciprocity and timing. Your former self would have been overcome with appreciation for these long-awaited gifts. Your answer? You used strategic knowledge to weigh each offer. You posed important questions to yourself. Would this have been available when I most needed it? Is this strategic positioning or a real partnership? Is this in line with my goals or with my values? You noted the timing and expressed gratitude for the colleagues' abrupt introductions after they had hoarded contacts. When your frugal friend suddenly decided to contribute to your projects, you took into account both their financial interests and their motivations. You welcomed the support while keeping a healthy skepticism about the motivation when the mentor who had been too busy to assist suddenly found time for in-depth advice. You were learning to be grateful for opportunities while upholding your expectations of how you would like to be treated. You could accept assistance without putting up with subpar treatment. You could work together without sacrificing your morals. The most advanced prong of the attachers was the third one, detailed ideas of what you two could achieve. They portrayed themselves as crucial to your next level of accomplishment, offered comprehensive plans for cooperation, and created enticing pictures of shared success. These lofty ideals might have tempted your former self, especially if they came from others who appeared to know more about your potential than you did. But your new self had gained something priceless, clarity about your own goals and principles. Your answer? You put their dedication to your real objectives, not simply your chances of success, to the test. You considered whether they agreed with your vision or if you sought to modify it to fit their skills. You could tell if their goal was to elevate you or to use you to elevate themselves. You saw if their suggestions for a cooperation benefited their goals or yours. When they proposed complex partnerships, you assessed whether they matched your real objectives or if they were merely impressive. You questioned whether their abilities were actually required or if they were fostering artificial reliance when they presented themselves as crucial to your success. When they depicted a common victory, you considered whether it would uphold or violate your principles. The moment of breakthrough. You came to the realization that someone who was genuinely intended to accompany you on your journey wouldn't have to put in as much effort to run for office. Without requesting a certain position or attempting to persuade you of their necessity, the correct people would inevitably fit your route. You were increasingly aware of the spectators as you handled the attachers' campaigns and the vampires' desperation. These folks were just regularly showing up. They weren't campaigning or panicking. You nearly missed them at first since they weren't making any noise. They were simply there, steady and encouraging, and they operated with a quiet confidence that captivated you. They weren't peddling partnerships like the attachers or demanding attention like the vampires. They provided value without expecting anything in return. They encouraged your development without attempting to guide it. They did not take credit for your victories. Your answer? You inclined with inquisitive admiration. You began to focus on the individuals who had been subtly encouraging all along. The mentor who provided direction without attempting to dictate your choices, the colleague who shared opportunities without asking favors, and the friend who regularly checked in without demanding anything in return. You saw who had been rejoicing in your little triumphs before they grew into major ones, who had been there to support you when you needed it without making you feel like a burden, and who had had faith in your abilities without attempting to control your path. Then you made a pivotal choice. Rather than only taking their support, you started to reflect their enthusiasm. You began providing the same level of connection in exchange. You started encouraging others' development without attempting to dictate it. You celebrated victories without requiring praise. Without keeping score, you provided value. This was a whole other manner of doing things than you had been taught by the attachers and vampires. You were witnessing reciprocal connections built on respect for one another and genuine concern, as opposed to transactional interactions based on necessity or strategy. The moment of breakthrough? You came to see that these individuals weren't merely encouraging. Rather, they shared the same frequency that you had strived to attain. The lessons you were studying had already been mastered by them. They were real-life representations of who you were growing into. Having a clear understanding of all three groups, you created a sophisticated plan that was effective on several levels. You developed a cohesive strategy that respected your beliefs and successfully sorted your relationships rather than attempting to manage each group alone. You were radical in your authenticity. This turned into your compass. You just kept growing rather than attempting to control how other people responded to your development. You made choices based on your principles rather than the comfort levels of others. Instead of saying what others wanted to hear, you told the truth. You remained true to your new boundaries despite vampires' attempts to guilt you into returning to your old habits. You stayed true to your true objectives even when attachers attempted to entice you with strategic chances. You responded with genuine gratitude when spectators offered assistance. Stopping the tiresome task of being several versions of yourself for different people was necessary for radical authenticity. It required combining every aspect of your personality into a single, authentic expression. It required having faith that the right people would value your true self, while the wrong people would avoid you. You established limits with ease. Your previous method of setting boundaries had been defensive and draining. You would establish a limit and then expend a great deal of energy justifying, defending, and upholding it in the face of persistent pressure. You adopted a breakthrough new strategy by establishing unassailable limits. You just upheld your principles rather than arguing about them. You simply made your decisions without providing an explanation. You silently enforced your boundaries rather than defending them. You didn't get involved in lengthy arguments about the rationale behind your boundaries when vampires tested them. You just quietly reiterated them and carried them out constantly. You failed to give thorough explanations when attachers attempted to circumvent your criteria. With quiet assurance, you held on to your position. Because it was based on internal conviction rather than outside validation, this effortless method was effective. You were establishing boundaries because they supported your well-being and were consistent with your principles, not to punish someone or make a point. Probably the most effective part of your plan was shifting your focus from relationships that made you feel less to ones that made you feel better. You ceased exerting yourself to prove your value to others who were adamant about ignoring it. You channeled your energy towards establishing connections with others who already valued you. In every aspect of your life, you prioritized quality over quantity. As a result, some relationships inevitably deteriorated since you were no longer making the effort to keep them going. It required you to decline social commitments that sapped your vitality without fostering deep connections. It meant putting your objectives and the individuals who helped you achieve them ahead of social pressures and those who drew your energy without giving it back. This was arguably the most challenging yet crucial aspect of your plan. If you want to witness God's miracles, act now. Contribute $100 or more through Super Thank You on YouTube. It's like a seed that comes back to you when planted. Let his light illuminate your steps. Every donation is an echo in his plan. You allow your genuine frequency to draw in compatible individuals and drive out incompatible ones. Rather than attempting to persuade others to treat you better, you just asked for better treatment and allowed others to react as best they could. You held yourself with dignity and let people show you who they were by their behavior, rather than giving an explanation for why you were deserving of respect. You let the teachings you once attempted to impart be taught by natural consequences. Without attempting to steer the process, you observed relationships rearranging themselves around your new energy. This took a great deal of trust, faith in your own value, faith in the process of personal development, and faith that the universe would supply the connections you needed to become the person you were destined to be. You were able to observe the force of authentic living in real time as each group sorted itself based on its true nature. Some vampires realized they needed to build their own internal resources after you set clear boundaries and refused to revert to their old habits. These were the ones who had the capacity for advancement, but had been choosing the simple route of draining others rather than working for themselves. You were amazed to see how some of your pals started managing their emotions on their own, rather than relying on you to do so. Instead of expecting unrestricted access, family members began to respect your time and effort. Colleagues stopped depending on your over-functioning and started doing their own work. These changes were lovely to see because they demonstrated that some people were prepared to put in the effort to stay in touch with you. They valued the relationship enough to change their strategy when their previous approaches failed. Others gradually disappeared from your world and found new people to drain. They were more dedicated to their dysfunction than to a sincere partnership. Instead of changing their strategy, they merely looked for new victims who were still learning how to set limits. Some intensified their frantic strategies until they revealed their genuine selves to the public. They were the ones who became more and more severe in their attempts to reestablish the previous dynamic because they were unable to accept that their manipulation was no longer effective. Even many who had previously supported them started to realize how toxic their actions had become. Their genuine dedication was exposed by the opportunistic attachers. Some started their own authenticity journey after determining that the effort needed for a true partnership was worthwhile. These were the individuals who, rather than acting maliciously, may have been acting strategically due to insecurity. You saw several co-workers quit attempting to put themselves in a better position and begin working together honestly. In place of meaningless networking, professional contacts started to provide genuine benefit. Rather than gathering targeted connections, social climbers began forming genuine relationships. These changes were satisfying because they demonstrated that some people were prepared to forgo deceptive methods in favor of sincere communication. Others realized they wanted simpler targets and shifted their efforts elsewhere when the manipulation failed. These were the individuals who were more dedicated to the plan than to the partnership. They chose to focus their efforts on people who were still receptive to superficial charm after realizing that establishing a connection with you took work and genuineness. Perhaps the most tenacious attachers, who refused to see that their calculated strategy was failing, burned out attempting to pretend to have a frequency they hadn't earned. They gave up when the effort proved unsustainable after exhausting themselves trying to keep up a false alignment with your energy. The observers got increasingly noticeable and involved in your life as the vampires and attachers sorted themselves out of your reality. They started exchanging resources that corresponded to your upgraded operational level. They provided sincere cooperation founded on respect for one another and complementing skills. Above all, they accepted you into a group of others who share your interests. Finding out that there were people who had previously mastered true living and could help you further was possibly the greatest gift of your metamorphosis. Nothing you had ever encountered felt like these relationships. There was only genuine concern, respect for one another, and a common dedication to honesty and progress, no scorekeeping, no manipulation, and no strategic positioning. Your true value is now reflected in every interaction in your life. Every chance fits with your sincere objectives. Every encounter respects your true principles. This came about naturally as a result of constantly honoring yourself and demanding that others do the same, not via coercion or violence. Your career changed when you began looking for possibilities that fit your skills and stopped taking jobs that didn't fully utilize your ability. As you shifted from sustaining relationships out of duty to investing in relationships that fostered growth for both parties, your social life changed. As you began to take sole responsibility for your own well-being and stopped controlling the emotions of others, the dynamics of your family changed. As you began to attract people who could match your emotional maturity and stopped accepting less than you deserved, your love connections grew deeper. Genuine power is what attracts high-caliber individuals to you. The way you currently conduct yourself, confident without being haughty, boundary without being inflexible, giving without being drained, attracts people who share your values. You've demonstrated that you won't undervalue yourself, so meaningful opportunities come your way. People approach you with better offers when they are aware of your criteria. They behave well when they are aware that you will not put up with mistreatment. Since you've perfected the art of being yourself, genuine connections come naturally. You just show up truthfully, and the proper people will notice and value what they see. There is no performance, no calculated positioning, and no relentless attempt to be what others want you to be. The way your transformation affects other people may be its most fulfilling feature. People can raise their own standards because of your example. They learn how healthy relationships work from your boundaries. Your accomplishments demonstrate that being genuine doesn't limit chances. Rather, it draws in better ones. After seeing how effective your boundaries are, you observe that friends are beginning to establish their own. After witnessing your handling of workplace dynamics, colleagues start advocating for themselves. After witnessing your failure to control your emotions, family members begin to take charge of their own feelings. You've turned into a living example of how to be true to yourself without ruining relationships, to have standards without being irrational, and to be genuine without being self-centered. You understood that the purpose of the game was never to prove yourself to those who were adamant about not watching. This realization was the pivotal moment. You had been playing a rigged game for years, trying to gain attention from those who had a stake in keeping you tiny and were out to get you. You had been looking for confirmation from people who couldn't or wouldn't give it. Regardless of who could or could not manage it, the game was about accepting your own worth and thriving from it. Instead of limiting yourself to match the restrictions of other people, the game encouraged you to create a life that reflected your personal development. You discovered that your teachers were the three groups. You learned to respect yourself first because energy vampires taught you that certain people will never appreciate what they can get for nothing. They taught you the value of setting limits and the strength of refusal. They showed how your unrestricted generosity was really making their dysfunction possible. You learned to distinguish between sincere and calculated advances from opportunistic attachers, who showed you that not everyone who aspires to success is prepared to put in the effort. They demonstrated how to distinguish between genuine partnership and deceptive posture. They trained you to believe your gut when it comes to people's intentions. You learned to trust the process of authentic living from strategic observers, who taught you that the universe aligns support when you are operating at your true frequency. They demonstrated to you the characteristics of wholesome relationships. They demonstrated that there are good individuals out there who will come when you're ready for them. The folks who thought it was costly to be around you were paying for their own unwillingness to change, not for your haughtiness. This insight relieved you of any lingering guilt regarding your metamorphosis. You realized that when people complained that you were too much work or high maintenance, they were really expressing their own resistance to change. Your expectations were just greater than what these individuals were prepared to fulfill. They weren't irrational. Your aspirations were incompatible with these people's desired methods of operation, but they weren't impossible. You were looking for somebody who could be as genuine as you were, not charging them exorbitant prices. You now know that your superpower is your frequency. It works more effectively the more truly you operate. As you keep developing, the sorting doesn't end. It only gets more complex. You now possess the knowledge to manage each new group with poise and strategic acumen. You're playing offense now, constructing a world that reflects your internal metamorphosis, rather than playing defense against those who seek to undermine you. Instead of continuing as a struggle, your path continues as an expansion. Every new level offers both fresh possibilities and new obstacles. You draw opportunities and individuals who complement your expanding capabilities. You become more adept and graceful at handling disagreements. Above all, you've come to trust the process. You are aware that connections will always be sorted according to your real style of life. You know that the appropriate opportunities will always come when you live up to your ideals. You think that by being true to yourself, you will always find the appropriate people. This is how you won the game, not by outperforming other players, but by becoming so true to yourself that only real people can remain in your circle. Since you have finally discovered the most crucial rule, that the game was always about discovering your true self, you are ruining the game. The three groups did exactly what they were supposed to do. You learnt what you needed to know about discernment, boundaries, and real power from them. They assisted you in acquiring abilities you were unaware you required. They equipped you for the success and caliber of relationships you currently enjoy. You now carry these lessons with you as you continue to develop into your greatest potential, not as scars from previous struggles, but as knowledge for building an incredible future. Yes,